Okay, my name is Sarah Gaskins, and today I'm going to talk about metamemory deficits in individuals with TBI. So what is metamemory? Basically, metamemory is thinking about your memory. In more specific terms, it's a self-regulatory system that includes self-awareness, self-monitoring, and self-control strategies. Self-awareness, also called autobiographical metamemory, are the opinions one holds about general skills. And then self-monitoring, also called maintenance, is monitoring memory failures and the ability to detect errors. This is also used for prediction of future memory failures. And then self-control is the implementation of strategies to prevent future memory failures, and this is more important for complex and non-routine tasks. So why is metamemory important? Well, metamemory is very important in everyday life because you're thinking about your memory. So you may use it when you are getting ready to go to the grocery store and you're questioning whether you're going to be able to remember remember all of the items that you're trying to get. And if you don't think you'll remember, you might utilize a strategy in order to make sure that you do remember everything. And so you might make a grocery list and bring your grocery list with you. So that's just one example. There's also, I'm going to highlight metamemory for learning new information because that's important later when we talk about TBI. But self-monitoring is made prior to acquisition. So you may ask yourself, how many times do I need to practice this before I learn it? Self-monitoring during learning may be in the form of asking yourself, is this method effectively working to learn new information? And then self-monitoring and self-control after retrieval, is the information I retrieved accurate? And how can I study better? So how can I study better is the self-control. It's questioning whether you used the best strategy in order to properly later recall the information. So metamemory and TBI. Metamemory deficits are common in TBI, especially those with damage to the frontal lobe, and metamemory deficits may be significant immediately following TBI. Unawareness of some cognitive deficits is common right after TBI, but judgments become more realistic later in recovery, typically, unless it's a very severe TBI. It really depends on the severity. And then individuals with TBI typically have difficulty recalling newly learned information, and this becomes even more of a problem due to deficits in metamemory. So the following are some measurements or ways that researchers have classified and explained the underlying processes of metamemory. So the first one is prediction skills. Prediction skills are really important in metamemory, specifically the self-awareness part of metamemory. So relative predictive accuracy is basically recall predictions versus recall performance. So high accuracy would mean that your prediction is similar to the actual performance. So if you predict that you will accurately recall information later on, but then you don't recall, then your actual performance is you don't properly recall that information, then you have low relative predictive accuracy. And then confidence is your perceived overall expectation of whether you can accurately recall information. So some people are overconfident, underconfident, or even close to actual recall performance. And individuals with TBI are commonly overconfident, and this may be due to working memory deficits. So the more one can hold or manipulate in working memory, the lower prediction of future recall. So if somebody is trying to retrieve the answer, if someone's trying to answer a question, they're going back into their memory, and they retrieve 5 possible answers versus someone who retrieves 2 possible answers, then the individual who retrieved 5 possible answers is going to have underconfidence in their ability, or lower confidence than the one who retrieved 2 possible answers, just because of statistics, because typically basically the person who retrieved 2 possible answers has a 50-50 shot of accurately retrieving the correct answer, whereas the other person has lower confidence because it's like a 20% chance. So that explains why individuals with TBI are typically overconfident. Then there's also predictive timing. So a study found that during noun pair learning, predictions delayed by about 30 seconds were more accurate than predictions made immediately after learning. And this was true for both TBI individuals and the control group, and this is called the delayed judgment of learning effect. Basically, sorry, there's a technical difficulty. So basically, predictions for accurate memory recall were more accurate when they were delayed versus when they were immediate. And then there is stimulus, which is just basically the different tasks. So comprehension and memory of text versus noun pairs. So I'm going to start talking about just a few studies. So participants in the narrative recall study, participants listened to narratives and made delayed recall predictions using a question by question format that asked questions varying in salience and explicitness. So typically main ideas are more salient than details, and then stated versus implied information. Adults with TBI recalled less than controls. Both controls recalled main ideas and implied information better than details and stated information. Predictive accuracy was higher for stated information than for implied. Predictive accuracy for main ideas and details was similar, even though main ideas were recalled better than details. And this suggests explicitness is a more influential factor than salience. The researcher also points out in the study that practically what he calls delayed self-quizzing isn't very common in everyday practice. And so even though in research delayed recall predictions are typically more accurate than immediate, it's more likely that someone will use immediate predictions. There's also something called the generalization study. So basically the researcher did a study on predictive accuracy during immediate and delayed noun pair tasks and narrative information. And she wanted to see if predictive accuracy and confidence would generalize across tasks, because that would make it easier for individuals with TBI to improve their self-monitoring. but unfortunately it didn't generalize, and so it emphasized the continued need for task-specific self-monitoring. Finally, this is a most recent study, and it's a really interesting study. It included 18 adults with moderate to severe TBI and 20 healthy controls. Participants played a virtual reality game where they encountered prospective memory items, such as taking medicine on schedule, and answered questions based on judgments of the likelihood of recognizing when a task should be done, known as the cue, and recalling what needed to be done, and they called it the task. So how did metamemory affect performance for tasks of prospective memory and TBI and control? Before we go into the results, this is just a screenshot of what the virtual reality game looks like and what it asks participants. So right here is an example of the cue, and here is an example of the task. So it found that all TBI participants performed significantly worse with predictive accuracy of prospective memory items compared to the control group, and the predictive accuracy was greater among TBI group when the task was to be performed compared to recall of what the task was. So basically, this just highlights the fact that perspective memory is really important for everyday tasks, and the ability to the ability to predict the accuracy of perspective memory really comes down to metamemory abilities, and so individuals with TBI showed deficits in both. So finally, the effects on communication. So what it really boils down to is frequent communication breakdowns. So in everyday conversations, individuals with TBI who are overconfident and also may need to make predictions that are immediate after learning instead of delayed, it may lead to poor predictive accuracy. And then poor predictive accuracy may lead to not utilizing strategies to prevent future memory errors, which leads to more communication breakdown. So it's quite a cyclical process. And this can be a strain on relationships, and it can be a strain on work performance, and it can overall lead to a lower quality of life unless there are some meta-memory interventions through training, memory training, and memory aids and things like that. Communication breakdown occurs. If an example of this would be if an individual is listening to a family member who is telling a story, so a narrative story, and they predict that they'll be able to accurately later recall the details of that story, but then they find that they, due to their memory deficits, that they don't accurately retrieve that information, then they might, it causes communication breakdown and a strain on the relationship. And just like the other study was talking about for the prospective tasks, many people with TBIs may have difficulties with independence and activities of daily living too, because they may anticipate that they will remember to make an appointment and when to make the appointment, and they may assume that they don't have any difficulties with their memory and they'll be able to do that, but then later they'll have memory failures, and that will become very frustrating. And so it would affect communication with everyone around them in their life. And then this is my bibliography.